Welcome to the Betrayal Files, your go-to channel for captivating stories of infidelity, deception, and betrayal. We explore real-life accounts and emotional tales, uncovering shocking secrets and heartfelt confessions. Subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated with our latest stories on the complexities of human relationships. The Business Trip. It all began innocently enough. A Thursday morning like any other, the sky just a little overcast, and the whiff of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air as Emma shuffled into the kitchen. She was already halfway through her second cup when Mark, her husband of 8 years, slid into the kitchen with that annoyingly cheery smile plastered on his face. "Good morning, love," he chirped, planting a kiss on her cheek. She muttered something resembling a greeting, but it was lost in her third sip. Mark's energy levels before 8 a.m. never failed to astound her. "I've got a big work trip coming up," he announced, tapping his briefcase. "London again this weekend." "Ah, of course. Another one of those big work trips." Mark had been traveling more and more these days. London one week, Paris the next, with Amsterdam squeezed in for good measure. Emma couldn't help but wonder if his job as a marketing executive had secretly turned into some kind of international spy gig. Maybe he was secretly James Bond, minus the accent, charm, and, well, secret agent skills. But she didn't say that. Not yet. "That's the third trip this month," she replied, raising an eyebrow. "They're really keeping you busy, huh?" "Yeah, we've got that huge client from New York. You know, Johnson and Company. They're planning this big expansion in Europe, and I'm the guy with the inside scoop." Mark had a talent for making his work sound far more exciting than it probably was. Emma had met Johnson once at a corporate dinner party. He was a balding, middle-aged man who liked to tell long-winded stories about golf tournaments that no one cared about. Not exactly the kind of guy who could plan a huge expansion. But who was she to judge? Emma watched him pack his things in that overly meticulous way he did, stuffing his laptop, chargers, and an extra pair of socks into his suitcase with a precision that would make a Tetris champion envious. "I'll miss you, babe," he said, turning to give her his best puppy dog eyes. I'm sure you will," she teased, rolling her eyes. "Don't forget to actually call me this time. You know, like last time, when you mysteriously forgot." Mark gave her a sheepish grin. "I told you, the Wi-Fi in that hotel was terrible." "Right. Wi-Fi. In a 5-star hotel in the middle of Paris. She wasn't born yesterday, but Emma let it slide. She always did. After all, she trusted Mark. Or at least, she wanted to. She wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, especially without evidence. But lately, something had felt off. Maybe it was the fact that his business trips were getting more frequent. Or maybe it was that nagging voice in the back of her mind that kept whispering, "What if?" Saturday came quicker than she expected. Mark left that morning with his suitcase in one hand and his phone glued to his ear. Something about needing to touch base with a client. Emma waved him off, watching as he disappeared into the taxi and then plopped down on the couch. It was strange, but a little part of her was looking forward to having the house to herself for the weekend. Maybe she'd finally get around to watching that ridiculous reality show her friends had been raving about, or indulge in the luxury of eating popcorn for dinner. It was the small things, really. By Sunday afternoon, she was starting to miss him. Not that she'd admit it. She texted him to check in, but got no response. Again, typical. She convinced herself that he was probably in some important meeting with Johnson, talking about golf clubs or stocks, or whatever it was that important businessmen talked about. But then something odd happened. Emma was cleaning out one of the kitchen drawers. She had run out of reality shows by this point, when she found an old receipt tucked under a pile of takeout menus. It was from last month during Mark's supposed business trip to Amsterdam. Only it wasn't from Amsterdam. No, this receipt was from a fancy little restaurant in Brighton. Brighton? She blinked, staring at the receipt as if it might suddenly change its mind. Brighton wasn't even close to Amsterdam. In fact, it was a solid 3-hour drive from London. And the date? It perfectly matched the weekend Mark had been away. Emma felt her heart do a little flip. Surely there was a logical explanation for this. Maybe it was a mistake, or maybe he had passed through Brighton on his way to catch a flight. Yeah, that made sense. Maybe. But the nagging voice returned, louder now. What if? She shoved the receipt back in the drawer, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut. Mark was a good man. They had been married for 8 years. He wouldn't, would he? Determined not to jump to conclusions, Emma decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, she had no real proof, just a receipt from a restaurant, a very fancy restaurant with a reservation for 2 on a weekend when he was supposed to be halfway across Europe. But curiosity got the better of her. The next morning, she did something she had never done before. She checked Mark's email. She wasn't proud of it, but desperate times called for desperate measures. And there it was, an email from his boss, confirming a weekend meeting in London. But that wasn't the part that made her stomach drop. No, the real kicker was the email he had sent. To her. Her, as in Samantha, the new assistant at his office. Looking forward to seeing you in Brighton this weekend. Brighton. That's when everything clicked into place. The late-night texts, the extra work trips, the mysterious phone calls. And now, the proof. Emma felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and oddly enough, a strange sense of relief. She had been right all along. But now what? She could confront him. She could throw the receipt in his face and watch as he stammered for an excuse. Or she could do something even better. Mark returned home that evening, looking tired but pleased with himself as usual. He set his suitcase down by the door and greeted Emma with a kiss. But this time she didn't smile back. Instead, she handed him a glass of wine. "How was the trip?" she asked sweetly. "Oh, you know, busy as always, meetings, presentations, the usual." "Sounds exhausting," she replied, nodding. "And Brighton? Did you have a nice time there too?" Mark froze mid-sip. His eyes flickered to hers, and for a brief moment she saw the panic set in. "Brighton? I wasn't in Brighton." Emma gave him a long, hard look, savoring the moment. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She pulled the receipt from her pocket and held it up. "Really? Because this says otherwise." Mark stared at the receipt as if it were a ticking time bomb. His face turned pale, and he opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Care to explain?" Emma asked, raising an eyebrow. Don't bother." She cut him off, setting the wine glass down. "I know everything, Mark. About the emails, about Samantha, about Brighton. All of it." Mark's face fell, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked utterly defeated. "I'm sorry," he whispered, looking down at the floor. "I messed up." Emma stood there for a moment, watching him squirm. She had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was happening, it didn't feel as satisfying as she thought it would. In fact, it felt strangely anticlimactic. She let out a deep breath, shaking her head. "Yeah, you did." There was a long pause as the weight of his actions seemed to settle over both of them. And then, finally, Emma spoke. "I'm not going to yell at you, Mark. I'm not even going to ask why you did it, because honestly, I don't care anymore." Mark looked up at her, his eyes wide with shock. "I'm done," she said simply. "I'm done with the lies, the secrets, all of it." He opened his mouth to protest, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because I deserve better. We both do." Mark stared at her, and for a moment, she saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. But that man was long gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. "I'll be staying at my sister's for a while," she added, turning to leave. "I need some time to think." And with that, she walked out the door, leaving Mark standing there in stunned silence, holding a glass of wine he would never finish. A week later, Emma found herself sitting in her sister's kitchen, sipping coffee and staring out the window. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt free. As for Mark, well, he still sent her the occasional text, apologizing, asking for another chance. But Emma knew better now. She had learned the hard way that some things can't be fixed with a simple, "I'm sorry." And Brighton? That was a chapter she was more than happy to leave behind.